All right, let's dive in. Today we're taking a closer look at some pretty intriguing stuff. You've sent us a whole bunch of legal documents, news articles, even forum posts, and they're all about Tulsi Gabbard and her connection to this group called the Science of Identity Foundation, AC for short.
Yeah, and right at the heart of it all is this guy, Chris Butler. He also goes by Guru Siddhaswarupananda Paramahamsa, which is, well, a mouthful. But anyway, he's the leader of SIF, and let me tell you, his influence goes way beyond just like a temple or an ashram.
Okay, so I'm looking at these sources, and SIF doesn't seem like your typical spiritual group. We're talking politics, international business, even allegations of criminal activity. Like, how do we even begin to unpack all of this?
I think the best place to start is with Chris Butler's own story. He got involved in the spiritual scene back in the late 1960s with the Hare Krishnas, ISK. He moved up pretty quickly in the movement, but then, well, let's just say there were some disagreements.
And this is where things get really interesting, right? He doesn't just quietly leave. He goes on to form his own group, the Krishna Yoga community, which over time turns into SIF.
Exactly. And what's fascinating is how he used music to draw people in, especially with this album he put out, Krishna Rock. It was a pretty unique approach back then, blending Eastern spiritual ideas with a more Western musical style.
So was this Krishna Rock album a big hit? Did it actually help him gain a following?
It definitely seems like it was part of his plan to reach a wider audience, especially younger folks who might not have been into the traditional devotional music. Now, around the same time, Butler's followers in Hawaii, they were getting pretty involved in a political party, the Independence for Godly Government, or IGG.
Oh, no, wait. So we've got a guru who's into rock music, and his followers are starting a political party. This is getting pretty wild.
Yeah, that's the thing about SIF. They're not easily put in a box. They were serious about politics, running candidates for office, trying to influence policy. But as their connection to Butler and their, well, Krishna-based beliefs became more public, it caused some friction.
Yeah, I can imagine. So how did Butler handle that situation? Did he, embrace the spotlight or try to stay out of it?
From what I can gather, he preferred to work more behind the scenes. He even went so far as to sue some news outlets, claiming they hadn't made a clear distinction between his group and ISK.
So image control was a big deal for him. Okay, let's shift gears a bit and talk about the woman at the center of all this. Tulsi Gabbard. It's not just that she's a former politician who's been linked to SIF, it's that her ties go way, way back.
Yeah,
Right?
absolutely. We're talking lifelong involvement here.
Yeah.
Gabbard grew up in SIF. Her parents were dedicated followers of Butler, and she's publicly acknowledged him as her spiritual master.
Wow, that's a pretty deep connection. So how do you think this upbringing shaped her worldview?
Well, based on these sources, Butler's teachings really emphasize things like traditional values, social conservatism, and a pretty strong critique of modern culture. He advocated for a simple life, one focused on spiritual practice and service to the guru.
And those values, they seem to line up with some of Gabbard's political stances over the years, especially her views on social issues.
You're right. And it's important to note that Gabbard's family wasn't just passively involved. Her mother actually ran the SIF school in the Philippines, a school specifically for the children of Butler's followers.
This school keeps popping up in these sources,
Yeah.
and not in a good way. What was it like for the kids who went there?
Well, former students have said it was really insular, very cut off from the outside world. They were taught to revere Butler, follow his every word, and basically avoid contact with anything outside their community.
Sounds pretty intense. And I think there were some allegations of abuse too, right?
Yes, unfortunately. Some former students have come forward with some really disturbing accounts of physical and emotional abuse. They talk about harsh punishments and manipulation. It raises serious questions about the level of control Butler had over his followers, especially the younger ones.
It definitely paints a picture of a very authoritarian leadership style. But to be fair, we're also seeing accounts from people who've been in SIF for years who speak about Butler with, incredible reverence and devotion. They see him as a true spiritual guide, someone who's changed their lives for the better.
That's the thing with groups like SIF. There are often these conflicting narratives about the leader and what it's like to be a member. Some find deep meaning and purpose, while others feel used and controlled.
So how do we make sense of these totally different experiences? Is it just a matter of perspective?
It's more nuanced than that. We have to consider the power dynamics at play, the psychological effects of Butler's teachings, and how individuals might be susceptible to his influence.
Okay, yeah, let's dig into that a bit more. But first, I got to hear about this whole QNet situation. This is where things take a really strange turn.
Oh, you're telling me. This is where we move from spirituality and personal beliefs into the world of international business and maybe even criminal activity. So QNet, it's this multi-level marketing company, and let's just say it's had its fair share of controversy, accusations of being a pyramid scheme, which basically means they focus more on recruiting new members than actually selling products.
Okay, yeah, that's definitely setting off some alarm bells.
Yeah.
But how does C, like, fit into all of this? How are they connected to this company?
Well, it turns out that a few high-ranking SEF members, people who were really close to Butler, they were heavily involved in QNet. Guys like Joseph Bismark, also known as Das, and Alan Tibby, who went by a Das.
So these weren't just any followers. These were like Butler's inner circle.
Exactly. And from what I'm seeing in these sources, their involvement wasn't just about, making some side cash. There are allegations that SIF members were encouraged, even pressured, to invest in QNet and bring in new recruits, often with the promise of, big financial rewards.
Now, if QNet really is a pyramid scheme, that puts SIF in a pretty tricky spot, right? I mean, we're talking about potential legal problems here?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, Bismarck was actually arrested in Indonesia because of his involvement with QNet's operations, and this wasn't just a small thing. QNet has faced legal action and investigations in quite a few countries.
Wow, this is getting serious.
Yeah.
So what about Gabbard? How does all of this reflect on her, especially considering she's still connected to Butler and SIF?
It definitely raises some eyebrows, it makes you wonder about her judgment, if there might be any conflicts of interest there. Critics have said that her ties to SIF, and therefore to people involved in these potentially illegal activities, could, compromise her ability to be objective and make fair decisions.
This is a lot to process, honestly.
Yeah.
We've got this spiritual leader with a questionable past, a group that's blurring the lines between religion and politics, and now this link to an international business that might be up to no good. It's hard to even know where to focus.
You're right, it's a tangled mess. But I think at the core of all this is the guru-disciple relationship. That's the foundation of SEF. And it's really the key to understanding how Butler has held so much sway over his followers for so long.
Let's talk about that dynamic then. We keep seeing these totally different accounts. People who see Butler as like a divine being who saved them, and others who feel like they were manipulated and abused. How do we reconcile these completely opposite experiences?
It's about understanding the nature of belief, and the power of charisma. Butler presents himself as the holder of truth, the guru who has the answers to spiritual freedom. And for people who are searching for meaning, for purpose, his teachings can be incredibly appealing.
And I imagine that for people who are already inclined to believe, who are looking for a strong authority figure, the appeal is even stronger.
Exactly. And that's where the potential for exploitation comes in. When someone puts their complete trust in a guru, they open themselves up to manipulation. Their critical thinking can get clouded, and they might be willing to overlook or excuse behavior that they normally wouldn't tolerate.
So it's not just about believing what the guru says. It's about, surrendering your will to him, letting him make decisions for you.
In a way, yeah. It's about taking his word as gospel, even if it goes against what he said before or just doesn't make sense. It's about putting his needs and the needs of the group above your own.
The sources mention some pretty specific things that Butler has said and done that seem aimed at, like controlling his followers' lives, dictating marriages and divorces, forbidding modern medicine, even making disciples eat his leftovers as some sort of spiritual cleansing ritual.
Yeah, to outsiders, those practices probably seem strange, maybe even abusive. But to those who've bought into Butler's teachings, they see it as devotion, as proof of their commitment and surrender to the guru.
It's fascinating, but it's also really unsettling. And it makes me wonder, how does someone reach that point where they're willing to give up so much of their own freedom and control?
It's often a gradual process. The guru starts by offering teachings that really resonate with what the person wants and needs, creating a sense of belonging, And then slowly, the demands increase, the boundaries get blurry, and the disciple gets more and more caught up in the guru's web.
This is all starting to sound a bit cult-like, to be honest.
Well, the line between a legitimate spiritual group and a cult, it can be pretty fuzzy. But there are some warning signs, Like a charismatic leader who demands total obedience, a belief system that isolates members from the outside world, and practices that are harmful or exploitative.
And from what you've told us, it sounds like SIF ticks a few of those boxes.
That's a conclusion you'll have to reach on your own. But what's clear is that SIF is a complicated and controversial organization with a history of secrecy and practices that raise a lot of questions.
And its influence goes way beyond just spirituality, touching on politics, business, and maybe even criminal activity.
Exactly. Which is why understanding SIF is so important, especially when we consider Tulsi Gabbard's continued association with the group.
Okay, so we spent some time exploring the world of SIF, the whole guru-disciple dynamic, and uncovered some pretty shocking stuff. But how does this all help us understand Tulsi Gabbard as a public figure?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Can we really separate her political career from her spiritual beliefs and her lifelong connection to Butler and SIF?
Yeah, is it even possible to draw a clear line between those two parts of her life?
That's something you'll have to think about as you keep digging into this. But I think it's safe to say that understanding the history and the practices of SIF, it gives us important context when we look at Gabbard's actions and choices.
It's like we've found this hidden layer, a secret code that helps us decode her motivations and her worldview.
Exactly. And now that you've had a peek behind the curtain, you're in a better position to make your own judgments about her character and, whether she's fit for public office.
So where do we go from here? We've looked at Butler's journey, how SIF came to be, the allegations of abuse and exploitation, that whole QNet connection. And we've seen how it all ties into Tulsi Gabbard's life and her political career. What are some key takeaways you think are important for our listeners to, really consider?
I think it's important to remember that this deep dive hasn't just been about uncovering facts and connections. It's about understanding how belief works, the power dynamics you see in these spiritual groups, and how someone's personal history can shape their public life.
It's like we've peeled back the layers of this onion and we're seeing the inner workings of a world most people don't even know exists.
Exactly. And what we've seen is that this world, the world of SIF, it's not just some isolated thing. It has connections to politics, to business, to potentially criminal activity. It raises questions about accountability, about transparency, about the potential for abuse within organizations that claim spiritual authority. It's pretty significant.
And we've also seen the impact a charismatic leader like Butler can have on his followers. To some, he's this inspiring guide. To others, he's someone who manipulates and controls them.
And that duality is something to keep in mind when you think about Tulsi Gabbard and her connection to SIF. Her supporters, they see her as a strong, independent woman who's found spiritual grounding. Her critics, they question her judgment, worry about undue influence.
Yeah, it's a complicated situation for sure. And honestly, I bet our listeners have more questions now than answers.
That's totally understandable. We've only scratched the surface here. But hopefully this deep dive has given you some insights, encouraged you to think critically about things.
So as we wrap up, what's the one thing you'd want our listeners to take away from all of this? What's the most important message?
I'd say don't be afraid to ask questions. Dig deeper. Challenge what you think you know. When it comes to politics, spirituality, and power, there are rarely easy answers. But by being informed, by being discerning, by really thinking critically, you can navigate these complicated issues more effectively.
That's great advice. And remember, the sources we've looked at today, they offer just one perspective on a really complex story. There's always more to learn, more voices to hear, more pieces of this puzzle to find. So keep exploring, keep asking those questions, and keep seeking a deeper understanding of the world around you.